Elevator sessions where we talk to startups that have done something amazing, and it's a quick fire interview type session where we hear what the secret to their success is. So we're going to hear from the startup Streetbees, and to interview Oliver May, who is the co-founder of Streetbees, we've got Daisy Stapley-Bunton, who is the founder and editor of Startup Magazine. Daisy and Oliver, please come up to the stage. And a round of applause.
Hello, testing.
So thanks for joining us with In an Elevator with Streetbees. My name's Daisy. I'm the editor and co-founder of Startups Magazine, which is a new print and digital magazine which you have hopefully seen as you've walked in. Our aim is to serve the tech startup community. So I'm delighted to be joined here by Ollie today, the founder of Streetbees, which is an amazing new disruptive company that's really turning the market research industry on its head. So you co-founded this 4.5 years ago, and you've now grown to a team of over 90 with a member base of over 2.5 million, and you've successfully raised over $17 million. So it's just incredible. So congratulations.
Thank you very much.
So I think when you look at startups, every successful startup has really identified a real-world problem and created a solution. So what was the real-world problem for you that you and your co-founder really identified and inspired Streetbees?
Absolutely. So my co-founder and I had been working in the management consulting space, and as part of that, we had identified very clearly that a lot of the consumer brands who were wanting to do projects with us, like expansion of existing brands that they had into new markets, or potentially things like developing an entirely new product from scratch, in order to be able to do that with confidence, what they really needed is data. And actually, in many instances where they saw the real opportunity for expansion was often developing markets. And what we realized through our time in management consulting was the fact that actually that data wasn't particularly readily available, and the data quality that we were seeing was very, very poor. So we had a big problem around data quality. It was very untimely. It would often take 3 or 4 months to actually get the data delivered back from these large incumbent data providers. And in addition to that, it was quite expensive, and they often wouldn't serve these developing markets. So that was kind of the key mission that sort of drove us to create this business. And when we really started looking into it, the key problem that we identified with the business model of some of these more traditional market research providers was that they were so dependent on a series of third parties, panel providers, for example, who would actually source the research from respondents in all of these different markets, that everybody was getting their little cut along the way, and the entire system was very inefficient. So our vision was to say, well, let's just build a global community of users using a mobile app interface so that we can connect in a very direct way with our consumers.
And it's in real time as well.
Correct.
So your market research is you ask open-ended questions, so you're getting really valuable answers to that. And then through the Streetbees machine learning algorithm, which is informed by natural language processing, you tag them based on emotion states. So tell me more about how this move towards a deeper insight into consumer emotion is actually what makes you a differentiator in the market.
Absolutely. So I think just for the benefit of the audience, to break down what we do in a little bit more detail, and to really highlight what some of the key differentiators are, it's important to touch on what you've talked about in terms of the importance of sourcing unstructured data from the community. So we're of the view at Streetbees that asking traditional multiple choice questions is not a very good way of getting really new insight and showing you something as a brand that you don't already know. Let me give you a really simple example. Imagine that you were sitting here in London trying to identify what the next hot new flavour for ice cream was going to be for Chinese consumers, and you were forced to write a multiple choice question. you would say, which of the following is a flavour that you enjoy eating? And you'd be forced to come up with things that were top of mind that were very British, like vanilla, chocolate, strawberry, etc. When you ask that as an open text question instead, what you're getting is unstructured data coming back from that community, and that's where we find a pattern in the respondents who might all be saying, actually, green tea bubble flavour is the one that we really want to go for. So the importance of moving away from this hypotheses-driven approach is really key to our methodology. And another really important thing is the ability to actually capture that data at the specific moment that a consumer engages with a product. And that's exactly what we're able to do because we are mobile first. So that gives you a nice, hopefully, synopsis of how we think about capturing the data. Then, as you've touched on with the natural language processing algorithms, why they're so important is because we need very scalable ways to actually process all of this unstructured text that we're getting back from the community. The whole reason why traditional market research providers have not attempted this problem is because natural language processing technology is very new, and it's something that's just come to the fore quite recently, and we're really at the cutting edge in terms of actually having algorithms that can interpret this text at scale and come up with meaningful insights for our clients.
So this is really valuable information for companies, whether they're looking to see if a product will translate into a new market via international expansion, or whether they're just looking for potential growth pockets. So can you take us through an example of how, real-world case study of how a business might use your tool?
Absolutely, yeah. So we do a lot of work with FMCG, fast-moving consumer good companies. So big brands that I'm sure you're all familiar with, like Unilever, Procter & Gamble, PepsiCo, all these kind of guys. And they're really interested very often in new product development. So where should I be innovating, right? And the reason that this is so key for these guys is because the barrier to entry for new startups coming into the FMCG space has been significantly lowered with the rise of things like direct-to-consumer brands. You've probably all heard of Dollar Shave Club, bought by $1 billion by these large FMCGs recently. So they're really concerned about not being innovative, and that's where we can really play a role. We ran a research quite recently for one of our big clients in the laundry space. And that was a really interesting and I think really representative example of how our tool can be used. The brief was very open. They said, Ollie, we're having a problem with laundry. It's a category that hasn't grown for about 20 or 30 years. How can you help us find a new product in that space? So what we did is we surveyed our UK community, and what we discovered using this kind of open text methodology was that millennials specifically in the UK were not washing their clothes as regularly as older age groups and feeling really guilty about that.
I'd like to say I'm an exception, hopefully.
I'll smell your clothes afterwards to determine whether that's correct. So these are the kind of growth opportunities or growth pockets that we can identify by capturing insight at the moment that a consumer is engaging with a particular laundry product, understanding the emotion that they're feeling, understanding the broader context in which they find themselves, and by bringing all of that together and identifying patterns across the entire data set, that leads to these pockets of opportunity, which we can then go back to these big brands with and say, that's where you should develop a new product. So that was a really interesting example.
Yeah.
That particular brand that ran that research spent, I think, about $100K with us, and on the back of it have rolled out a new product which you can actually find in supermarkets today called Day 2, and their expectation is £100 million revenue in their first year of sales.
So it was a really amazing ROI for them based on that initial investment.
Absolutely.
So we were talking earlier about how you think in the future companies might weigh the value over traditional styles of advertising based on their market research. How do you think your tool is going to influence that?
Yeah, so it's a great question. I think the interplay between market research and advertising is going to be really fascinating to observe the way in which that actually evolves through time. I think what we're seeing, particularly in the world of advertising, is that there's an increasing importance on being incredibly targeted with your advertising. So we're moving away from the world of pure TV advertising, billboards, where everybody is accessing that advertising at once. Certainly what we're seeing on the FMCG side is a big rise in allocation of budget towards, for example, social media advertising, where you can get a lot more targeted in terms of age group, other demographic factors, region, income, all these kind of things. And that ties in very nicely with the Streetbees approach, because you remember when I'm talking about these growth pockets, some of the dimensions that are included in those growth pockets are some of those demographic factors. So the millennial example we talked about with the laundry, if I'm a big brand like Unilever and Procter & Gamble trying to produce these products and I now want to advertise them, I can actually use some of that Streetbees insight and some of the wording that we actually collect from our users and play that back to very targeted user groups, both in terms of the copy that I'm using in that advertising, but also in terms of who specifically I'm targeting. So I see a really interesting kind of interplay emerging between the type of growth pocket analysis that we do and how that can feed in a very direct way into targeted advertising campaigns.
And as you know, from our perspective, we want to try and help startup companies. So what advice would you offer them in terms of, from your experience with Streetbees, on how they can look to identify potential market opportunities?
Absolutely. So I think that Streetbees can really support startups, and we do have a number of startups already in our client roster, in terms of really getting involved at that very early innovation stage. And often in startup land, we talk a lot about having a very test and learn approach and making sure that we have that level of validation before we really invest time, money and energy in going to market. And I think that that really sits very nicely with the whole Streetbees philosophy, where we're saying to big brands, but we can also be saying to startups, really validate some of your assumptions around the products, and we can even elucidate what some of the features of those products are going to be before you go to market.
So that's really going to help startups with both getting market validation and proof of concept, which will help them with their investor decks.
Absolutely, yep.
So your community, which again, amazing, 2.5 million strong, your bees, they're incentivized to participate in this market research.
That's correct. Anybody in the audience can become a bee. You can download the Streetbees app. We have really a combination of different things that happen in the app. It could be paid stories, as we call them, which are surveys, which are typically coming from very specific brands, although we won't ever mention the brand name. But we also put a bunch of fun stuff in there as well. We run various competitions. It's very kind of WhatsApp-like. So we've got a chat interface. You can submit photos, videos, text conversation. It's a bot-style app, so it feels like somebody's talking to you on the other end.
So I guess my last question would be then is that you sort of empower your users to take ownership and monetize their own data rather than having it be mined by a third party, which is obviously a contentious topic in the public eye since the Cambridge Analytica scandal. Do you think it's that sense of ownership of them taking back their own data that has grown your base to 2.5 million?
Yeah, I think that's a really important philosophical point, actually. And I do see us as being really setting quite a new tone in technology. If you put us side by side with the likes of Google and the likes of Facebook, which I think have, in a GDPR world, in an increasingly regulated world, will have increasing complexities around their business model as they continue to try and support what I would call almost a tacit acquisition of data without very clear user consents. Yeah. And I think that philosophically, those kind of business models will continue to experience regulatory issues going forward. Our business model, as you've correctly highlighted, is very clean in the sense that you're signing up as a user to the platform, you're entering into almost a contract to sell your data for a value that you think is fair. And I think that that adds so much more transparency to the relationship that we have with our users and trust as well. So I think that's the future.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for joining us, and thanks for coming along to here in an elevator with Streetbees.
Fantastic. Thanks very much, Daisy.
Thank you, Dave.